format is basically we're going to talk for maybe, I don't know, 20, 30 minutes, sort of setting up some of the issues. And I guess I like the title, by the way, The Moral Case Against Altruism. I'll want to comment on that a bit. And then we'll open it up for questions. So, oh, thanks a lot. I was wondering about that. Man's got a drink. I mean, we're here in large part because there's a conference, Ayn Rand Con Europe, right? So there's a weekend conference here in London that we're both speaking at and attending, and we're happy to speak, for Razi's ARC UK group. Why altruism? Why pick this as a talk? Why is this an important subject to talk about? And I think one of the things that's relevant is the title, The Moral Case Against Altruism. I think the title should be, I don't know how much you're familiar with Ayn Rand, but to some extent provocative or interesting, often because we have I think we speaking of as in the culture, in the general culture, have a positive view toward altruism. So we'll say something about what that is and why. But the idea, and even I think that many people equate morality with altruism in important ways. So a moral case against altruism sounds kind of funny. So it's like a moral case against morality. And so what is the alternative with which we're contrasting altruism, if you're thinking about it as a moral framework or a moral approach to morality? So what is altruism? And what's the case against it? What's so bad about it? So I think we could start saying something about what altruism is. You want to jump in, or I'll start?
Go ahead, yeah.
So altruism, I think the term is interesting, actually. So the term was actually coined in the mid-19th century by a French philosopher named Auguste Comte to name his own moral theory, which basically was you should live for others. And so one of the things Comte wanted to do was, he says, we've got basically two kind of inherent motivations. One is self-interested motivation, and one is a more, as he calls it, benevolent or outward-facing motivation, where you want to do good for others. And his idea was to act only from the motive of doing good for others, and never for doing good for oneself. Never to act for oneself, but always to act for others. So you prioritize or place above self-interest doing good for others. And it was a kind of a way of trying to have a more secular approach to what I think is in essence a basic Christian kind of approach, is, where you serve God and your neighbors, right? And this was, well, we don't believe in God anymore, let's cut the God out of it, but retain that sort of religious, sort of almost fervent devotion toward the other in some way. In this case, the other is just other people. Now, the way that term gets used today is often more like benevolence, being nice to people and stuff. So that's not that's not what we're talking about here, and we can say more about that as well. But it's a moral framework that, even if you don't know anything about this guy Comte and how the term came about or whatever, I think the basic orientation of just about every moral perspective today, at least in the West, is fundamentally altruistic. At least it's fundamentally about, it's an orientation toward other people, like morality is about what you do for other people, and particularly about you're subordinating your own self-interest toward the interests of others. And I think it comes up in the culture, everything from your mom telling you or your teachers telling you, don't be selfish. We hear that kind of thing all of the time. How many times have you heard selfishness being praised in the culture as morally good? Probably zero. And we have a very negative view of self-interest in the culture in general. So the idea of placing the interest of others above yourself sounds morally noble to many people. And yet, Ayn Rand certainly thinks it's evil, in effect. It's the worst possible approach that you could take to philosophy, or to ethics, I think. I don't know if it's the worst possible, but it's the antipode, the opposite to a proper approach to values. Partly because she thinks ethics should be fundamentally about pursuing the values that actually sustain and enrich your life. And altruism says, in effect, your proper response to values should be to give them up. Yeah, and in that sense, I think there's a fundamentally sort of anti-self. So every one of you is a self. And in that sense, it's against every single one of you. If you take that seriously, if you take that morality seriously, it amounts to throw away your life. Now, you don't often get told, hey, throw away your life, right? So we can talk a bit about how altruism just sort of shows up in our lives in that way. So your parents probably didn't say throw away your life. You didn't go to college and say throw away your life. But there's a way in which altruism is a way of facing morality or approaching it, just sort of pervades the culture in all sorts of ways.
Let me say two things connected to that. So one is the title of this, you talked about the moral case against altruism. Another way of thinking about it is what is the moral case against conventional morality? So you said about Comte, that he coined the term in the 19th century, but you also said, which is the much more important thing, that this has been around for centuries, and it is now synonymous with morality. That morality means in some way or another that you have to sacrifice. That is, it looks at you and says, you don't count, something other than you counts. And that's what you have to be oriented to, and you have to engage in self-sacrifice. So Ayn Rand will often talk about it as altruism, but she'll also call it the morality of sacrifice, and she'll also call it the morality of self-sacrifice. And that whatever is disagreed about, so do you have to sacrifice for God, your neighbor, the nation, society, the public interest? You can give more, that's not an exhaustive list. For the environment, family, your tribe, your political party. So there's a lot of variation, but there's one constant, and the constant is that you have to sacrifice your values, your life, your interest, your money, your time for the sake of this other cause. And altruism, in the narrow sense, the term is Latin for otherism, so it's really focused on other people, your neighbor, strangers, even your enemy, to take the kind of the religious cashing out of this, or the Christian cashing out of this. But it's all directed at you, and you don't count, and your interests don't count, and your values don't count. So the idea that you could think of, so the altruism, this is a philosophic, moral perspective. It's an idea, and it's a theory, and it's a theory that was not always around. So I think Aaron's an expert in Greek philosophy, so you could talk about this more, but that it's wrong to think of the Greeks as altruistic. And the moral codes that they advocated as altruistic, that what they were focused on is looking at you and making sure that you sacrifice, that you give up. But today, that whole approach is unknown. So this has a monopoly. This is one of the things Ayn Rand often emphasized. It has a monopoly on ethics, that people now think if you're going to be moral, and if you're concerned with morality, you're concerned with sacrifice. That is just like, it's almost by definition. That's what it is. And she challenges that is not true by definition. You have to have a whole account of why do you even need a morality. If you understand that, then you will understand that the idea that what it tells you is identify values and then sacrifice them. Give them up. So figure out that money is something good to have, and then don't you dare have it. You can give it to other people. And for some reason, we can talk about what the reasons are. For some reason, they can accept the money. So it's selfish for you to keep the money. Why is it not selfish for them if you give it to somebody? If you give it to someone in the third world, if you give it to someone in Africa, if you give it to someone in Ukraine. Now, why is it that if you're to view it, it's a sacrifice for you, why are they entitled to take it? Why aren't they being selfish when they accept it? And there's altruism has a whole view about why that is, it seems like that is a question you should ask. It's a question Ayn Rand asked. It's a question almost nobody else ever asks. And yet, if you're really thinking about this as a moral approach, it is like, yeah, if I'm not allowed to keep my money, if I'm not allowed to keep my time, if I can't have a big house, why can someone else? Why, if I give it away, is that makes sense? Oh yeah, and of course the recipients, there's no issue about that. Why can't I keep it? So the real target when she's thinking about conventional morality is the idea that sacrifice names the essence of morality. That what morality is about surrendering values, giving them up, and it's for her in the end a detail, whether you give them up for the sake of God, your neighbor, the environment, your particular church, your nation, your tribe. And so when we're talking about altruism, that's what we're talking about. And she thinks, and I think this is true, that this is the dominant way of thinking about morality. And you put it that it's evil. I mean, imagine a parent and it unfortunately does happen, so it's not that hard to imagine, but a parent telling a young child, their young child, you don't count, your values don't count, what you want in life doesn't count, you're to give that all away for the sake of other people, strangers, and so on. And the idea is, like, that's a benevolent attitude towards the young child. That's exhibiting goodwill towards him, to tell him, yeah, you don't count, your values don't count, your life doesn't count. Don't you dare advance your interest. Just think about other people. And the idea that that's an expression of goodwill or benevolence is, if you start to ask questions, it should be, yeah, really? Like, that's what goodwill and benevolence towards other people means? And she thinks, like, this is the height of absurdity to view altruism as somehow synonymous with goodwill or benevolence.
Yeah, and to go back to the issue about conventional morality, so both about conventional morality and altruism and how self-sacrifice is at the core. Conventional morality is a kind of a phrase to use for basically the way we think about morality, and it's something kind of a non-sophisticated or unphilosophical way, just like a knee-jerk kind of view about how we absorb morality in the culture. So there's more to conventional morality than self-sacrifice. I mean, there's you tell the truth and pay your debts and just all the other stuff that kind of is included in what we would normally think of as moral. But notice that all of those kinds of things are also compatible with or components of a self-interested life. Thinking about morality as a matter of self-interest. There are self-interested reasons to pay your debts and to be honest and stuff, but what the core of conventional morality really retains is the self-sacrifice. And if it didn't have that, we wouldn't have such a negative view. It might be kind of unphilosophical or not very well integrated, but it's the self-sacrifice that is so bad. And you mentioned the Greeks. Yeah, so I was just thinking about this today. I'm giving a talk on altruism later on, and so I was thinking about the subject, and the more I think about it is I think we're very badly educated about ethics. Like, we don't know much about ethics in the end. We know a number of things we've been told. Don't lie, cheat, and steal, and whatever it is. Don't sleep with your neighbor's wife or whatever. And you're told some prohibitions, and you've kind of been oriented to think of certain things as good or bad, right or wrong. But I think to really have a concept of ethics, you need more than just that. You need a view of different theories of ethics, different perspectives on morality, different perspectives on what the goal of ethics should be, different perspectives on what the substantive content of morality, like how do you live? Like, what virtues should you try to practice or inculcate, or do you even need virtues? And to look at different perspectives on morality so you can start to say, okay, well, what's the common denominator here? What is a morality? And I don't think we're very well educated in that, unless you study philosophy and you just look at different moralities. You mentioned ancient Greece. And I think that's where people often think of morality just as, altruism, as self-sacrifice, doing the good for others and, placing others above self. I think this is in large part the fault falls with Christianity and the long impact that that's had. But if you look back to ancient Greek conceptions of ethics, where you had substantive theories about the nature of ethics and the theories about the specific kinds of virtues and the goals and what's it all about and how to live the moral life, it's all focused, there are some outliers, but it's in essence all focused on what is the best life for the individual and then how to live it and what are the requirements, what does it take to become a moral person and to reach the goal of happiness, which reach the goal of ethics, which they all thought of as happiness. That's bizarre. Has anyone ever told you that happiness, your individual personal happiness, is the goal of ethics? It's what you're after. Now, your parents probably said, honey, I want you to be happy. But then it usually just ends there. But you never think about that in moral terms, as a moral goal. Someone might think, well, as long as you sacrifice for others and do all these things and give to charity and whatever all these obligations are, yeah, if you can be happy in the meantime, that's fine. But it's not. It's a way in which it can get shoehorned in if it's okay, and but it's not. It's never thought of as the moral goal. And for the Greeks, I think what's interesting about it, it's the goal of life is to become happy, live a flourishing, full life, developing your talents, your abilities, practicing certain kinds of virtues. And it was a kind of a rich conception of what it is, and it's completely non-altruistic. I mean, there are some strains in ancient Greek philosophy which push toward thinking more of the community as a whole or something, but they never thought of that in terms of sacrifice. It was more about my happiness requires that I sort of integrate with the community or whatever it is, but it was all about your personal happiness. And so one of the things Ayn Rand is doing is I think she's getting back to a more kind of classical Greek in effect in its basic orientation, which it's about the individual, and it's about reaching your own happiness where that isn't just whim. Because the Greek philosophers generally, they were not, it's all about whim. They were definitely opposed to that. And they had all sorts of examples of that kind of approach to life and why it can't lead you to success, it can't lead you to happiness. And the centrality of reason was the other thing. Even Plato, who gets flack within objectivism, even Plato's view is, yeah, if you run by your emotions or your whims or whatever you feel like doing, it's a complete recipe for disaster. That's not what it looks like to pursue happiness. And that reason has to be your only guide, because it's the only thing that can determine what's for your own good in the long term. You got a view on reason that connects you to some other world, and you got all sorts of problems. But that whole orientation, I think, is lost to us culturally. That's why you say you're opposed to altruism. It's hard for people to think that an alternative to altruism, they think of that as an alternative to morality, because they have such a, like what frozen concept, what Ayn Rand called a frozen concept. It's where you have an abstraction that's sort of frozen or stuck at the level of one element. It's like holding an automobile in terms of Toyota. No, it's a much wider phenomenon. Many more things are included in that. It's not just one item, and I think a lot of people hold morality that way. Partly it's why, one of the things Ayn Rand wants to do is to kind of break up that, form a wider view of what is possible in morality, and I think really definitely the content and the goal. Because if you ask, what's the goal of morality? I actually don't know what people would say. What's the goal of morality? It would be to do what's right? I don't know if they even think about, the goal. It could be, for a Christian, it could be to get to heaven, to meet God's approval and, the requirements to live in paradise with heaven or something. That's even self-interested, though it doesn't exist, but it's at least offering a motive,
But the most consistent religious figures will say, if that's your motive, then you're not really interested in morality. Yeah. And when it was secularized, that too, that's part of the whole Kantian view, that the test of that you're interested in morality is that you don't see that it does anything beneficial for you, that you do it out of duty, not out of interest. And the duty is, well, this is what is moral. And it's just a secularization of, well, God commanded it, so you're supposed to do it. And now it's God sort of retreats, but there's still these duties, which are in effect commandments, that you have to obey. And what morality is obedience. And that's part of why, what's your goal? To have a goal is to have an element of self-exertion and to have an element of self-interest, that I'm going to say and set what my goal is. No, who are you to set what your goal is? That has been set for you. You're a servant. And so at an individual level, part of why Ayn Rand thinks altruism is evil is that, and evil here, she means evil, is that the essence of life is to think about what your life is, what it requires, and to learn how to pursue it, to learn how to pursue what actually advances your life. What are the values that are required, that you have to achieve? What are the virtues you have to practice? What is the kind of person that you're going to become? And altruism says all of that is besides the point. So one of the ways she put it is all it's focused on is the issue of beneficiary. Who benefits from your moral action? If you benefit, it's not moral. If someone else is said to benefit, yeah, you can basically do anything. And when you look at the history of the West, basically every cause was treated as, every monstrous cause, and causes that we now, some think of as monstrous, and some that we don't. So we think of the Nazis as monstrous. Their whole justification was altruistic. It was,
and they were open about it.
Yeah, they're open about it. It is, you individual German do not count. You're a worm, basically. You're to serve the state and the nation and the race. You're to sacrifice for these things. We will tell you, and we will tell you over and over and over. And if you read the Nazi propaganda, they tell them over and over and over, this is what you have to give up. This is what you have to surrender. This is what you have to say that, yeah, I've got no right to this. What counts is the nation and the race and the country. Communism, from each according to his ability to each according to his need, is outright altruism, and it's even more naked than the Nazis, which is part of the reason that communism is not viewed as the evil that Nazism is viewed. Nazism is painted as, well, you're saying the German race is superior to other races and so on. And you can't make a claim about superiority. That's asserting an interest and so on. So it's painted as what the Nazis were about is about some kind of self-interest, which is not true at all. But you can't paint the communists like that. They were open. Yeah, if you've got ability, if you've produced something, if you created something, you don't get to keep it. It goes to other people. And if at a certain level, if you ask, like, isn't that what we're always told is what morality is about? If you've created something, if you've achieved something, if you're a Bill Gates who's made billions, what morality consists in is giving it away, giving it up. And that's what the communists said. Like, this is where we're creating a utopia that where we're going to do this. And so whatever criticisms are made, you've got the wrong leaders, you had the wrong 5-year plan, it was you used too much force in the pursuit of these goals. The goals are right. The goals are noble. This is what morality is. And we all know it. And so you can go in basically every major city and there will be a museum and monuments to the Holocaust. Are there any to the millions and millions and millions of victims of communism? No. Because what the communists were doing is noble. It's what altruism tells you to do, and it's what we've been told over and over and over to do. So at an individual level, it sweeps away what morality should be concerned with, and at a cultural level, it has sanctioned and given a moral voice to the most monstrous of deeds. And Ayn Rand thought that it's in the essence of sort of injecting this into the lifeblood of Western civilization and the Western mind with Christianity is it was so open at the start of it. So if you think of like what is the symbol of sacrifice in the West, it's Jesus on the cross. That is, and if you think of like how many replications there are of if you just have gone into museums, how many replications throughout Western history of this as this is the moral ideal. And what does that ideal really mean? It means the person of perfect virtue, the person who's taken as he is the exemplar of morality, he is all good, sacrifices himself in a brutal way, nailed to the cross, for the sake of whom? For the sake of sinners. And if you hold up that as a moral ideal, that we're going to take the good, we're going to sacrifice it for the sake of what that we admit is bad and evil for sinners, and that's the essence of what morality is about, is someone who views himself as good and then slashes that away for the sake of people he does not view as good. That is what, in one form or another, watered down, so that we now, for centuries in the West, have come to think that's what morality is. And to get part of why she thinks of it as evil, all that is a recipe to siphon the blood of the good and transfuse it into evil people. It's a morality designed to aid evil. And that, like, if you think of what has happened with communism, that is what it's a morality that gave sanction to the monsters, the communist leaders who literally killed millions and millions and millions of people. So it's, when she thinks of it as evil, she means evil, not it's mistaken, there's some things bad about it, it's carried too far. It's the whole essence of it is that this is wrong. And it's monstrously wrong. And you need, so in part in Atlas Shrugged, so, which is her, I think it's right to put it to her magnum opus, part of it, what she says in there is you need to not return to morality, but to discover it. Because for centuries we've had a moral view that is actually anti-morality. It's anti the good and pro-evil. And there's no way to screw up a culture more than to do that to a culture. And so she did not have a very positive view of Christianity.
And if you, the audience, came to a talk on altruism and you showed up at a venue like this and stuff, and the speakers up here were teaching you to emulate Christ on the cross as the way you presented it, like you actually individually think about what you love in life. Think about what's important to you. Think about if you were stranded on an island or found out you were going to die soon, you'd inconsolably miss. Think about that and give it up. And really trying to preach that to you and convince you of that. It's like, I think this gets to the level of it's the exact opposite approach of what you should take in life. Put it this way, it's the exact opposite of what life requires. And that's right, it's a kind of a death worship view. Now in effect, probably none of you were actually taught to worship death and to want death and to kind of destroy yourselves. So we can talk briefly about how this comes into it. I mean, partly we just pick it up from the culture. So we get, like you said, sort of a watered down sort of blend of a general sort of culture, which is, I mean, the way I think about it is most of our lives are spent doing what? They're spent pursuing various kinds of values, going after things that we want to get a hold of, things we want to keep, things we want to use, things that we want to enjoy. We spend our lives pursuing values, most of them. I mean, maybe not very well, maybe we pursue mistaken values, but life as such is a process of a continual process of pursuing values and using them, pursuing them, keeping them, using them, enjoying them, pursuing them again, and just rinse and repeat, right? That's the whole process of what life is involved. So if you tell people the proper response to values is not to gain and keep them, but to give them away, I mean, that's the sense in which it's deeply anti-life. It's telling you that all of the things that are required for life, to give them up. But when you think, so think about just the sort of the cultural expectations that we have. Often, this is not true of everyone. I heard that it's not very true in England. I don't know. But often there are expectations from the family, which are in some sense supposed to supersede your own. Like you want to, I don't know, you want to go to another city or another state or some other area far away for college, and your parents expect you to stay there, and we need help around the house, and just you should stay here. We'd like you to be here. And there's a sense in which there's a kind of a pressure to not go after what you really want and to stay at home. And it's not Christ on the cross exactly, but it's also that, I mean, I don't know why your parents would tell you this because it's not very nice, but it's sort of like what you really want to do. Maybe you hate your little town. I always did. But maybe it's just that you want to get out. You want to do something new. You want to be somewhere different. You want to escape, in effect, some aspects of your family maybe. And the idea is, well, that doesn't matter. What matters is that, you please your family, or you make mom happy and grandma, or whatever it is. And these little cuts. It's, I don't know, it just happens everywhere. Like you're a businessman, and you think, I'll be more profitable, or I'll be more able to be competitive and stuff if I can lower my labor costs and stuff, so I'm going to send some of my factory over to Southeast Asia or somewhere where I can save money on labor costs and stuff. And then the president says, well, no, we have to have American jobs, and we have to prioritize American jobs, and so we can't do that. I can't send these things, or they'll limit the number of visas that you can get, and so it's very hard to hire foreign labor. And all of the ideas you have to sacrifice for the nation. The nation demands more American jobs, or whatever it is, or British jobs, or whatever it is. That should take precedence over your own judgment about what's good for your company, about where your goals are, what you want to do. That should take precedence in some way. So there's all sorts of ways we're asked to sacrifice. Just take the whole welfare state system. All of us live in a welfare state. I don't know where everybody's from, but I'm guessing all of us live in a welfare state. The US certainly is, Britain is, France, well, I don't know where everyone's from. Or worse, maybe worse than I don't know. But the whole structure is need supersedes rights. So if somewhere out there somebody needs something, medical care, I don't know, dentures, so education, housing, income, wherever that exists, the idea is, well, everyone should be forced to, that's more the collectivism, but it's more everyone should be forced to contribute. Need simply creates or generates an automatic moral obligation to alleviate that need. And that's something people tend to feel. If there's need somewhere, like how could you have a moral system where it doesn't have obligations to serve those in need? That's not even a moral system. Again, that's the equation of morality and altruism. So the whole system is based on that. How would you justify these kind of welfare state kind of things if you didn't have the principle that the needs of others supersede your own? Well, what if I want to keep my money? What if I have enough money, for example, to pay for my own, I don't know, medical care or education? I don't have kids, so I don't have to pay for anybody's education of my own. Why can't I just do that on my own? Can I opt out? Opt out? No. I mean, these people need it, and you have money, and you're supposed to pay for it. So it's just taken for granted throughout the culture. And I think just all these little examples that sort of, I think, they kind of crowd in on you. And I think ultimately, I mean, even though I think some objectivists, I think they have a lot of altruism is lingering in them. And I think one respect in this is a duty approach to ethics. I think when they think about, I have a duty to be productive, or something like that. Thou shalt, and it sits as a kind of a weight that's coming from the outside and pressing down on them. They must do it. And it's not like they see it as, like, what do I want to build? How do I want to generate the wealth that's going to support and sustain my life? And they think about it as a self-interested pursuit. I mean, I think that whole duty ethics approach comes from that. But people are uncomfortable. Even some objectivists are uncomfortable with the virtue of selfishness. You're for selfishness. I mean, well, I'm for enlightened self-interest. Or so, yeah, they kind of like want to soften it because it's. I mean, who really has the confidence and the real understanding to say without bravado, something like what Rourke says in his courtroom speech. I don't recognize anybody's right to 1 minute of my life, 1 minute of my time, 1 ounce of my effort, of my and to mean that. And to live like that, let alone live like that, right? It's one thing to say it and say, yeah, that's my moral code. It's another thing to really live like that. I don't prioritize anybody's life over my own, or my time or my energy. I don't allow them to sap that from me, whether it's through guilt or whatever. And just to really take that seriously and to embody it in a serious way. I think that's a real achievement, and I think that's difficult because there are all sorts of pressures, but yeah, I think it's very difficult, I think, to live the kind of self-focused life that Ayn Rand projects, I think, in the novels. If you look at Howard Rourke and the way he lives, I think you'll probably find a gap between this and your own attitude to your goals, and to your priorities, and to your self-confidence. And I mean, that's no sin. It's just sort of like it's a pinnacle to achieve that. So it's not surprising that there's a gap, but it's just that one of them is like how much are you sacrificing in life? And learning, I don't think it's always obvious that when you're sacrificing, as I think altruism is not a notion of living for others. That's a more specific kind of thing, but the phenomenon of self-sacrifice is wider. And if you think about your life, your career, your relationships, I think people sacrifice much more than they think they do. Partly because it's hard to know sometimes when you're sacrificing versus when you're just avoiding a conflict in the short term and you're going to come back to it and deal with it, or there's lots of different things. Am I really compromising at work? Should I stand up for myself a little bit more in this area, or is it really, I don't know, something else? And it's not always easy to identify. And it's not always about living for others, but sometimes the issue of the phenomenon of self-sacrifice is, I think, much wider than that. But yeah.
Should we also, I want to say one last thing, which then, how long have we gone? We probably should open it up for questions. So another angle on how, just to get a hold of how much this has saturated our culture, is the idea, is the equation of altruism with benevolence or goodwill. And from the other perspective, the kind of animosity that Ayn Rand met when she was alive for advocating what she advocated, and the idea that she hates people, is a misanthrope. And so what she tells you is that your life counts. It should matter to you. It should be your highest value. You should learn to pursue it. You should take your happiness seriously and make something of your life. And if we all do that, we'll have a great world. You hate people is the response to that.
Sociopath.
Because, where's the sacrifice? Where's the morality in this? You're telling people their happiness should matter to them and they should pursue it. And it's hard to, unless you really read some of the reviews and things of what the reaction to her work, which even surprised her, and she knows how much altruism is in the culture, that the idea that you hate someone if you tell them pursue your happiness. And on the flip side, the idea that, you're expressing goodwill and benevolence when you say, your happiness doesn't count. Why do you think you should think about your happiness? You should be thinking about other people. That's an expression of goodwill and benevolence. And both, that altruism means goodwill, it's often treated as synonymous when they're not, they're opposites. And the idea that if someone tells you, take your selfishness, your self-interest, and your happiness seriously, they hate you. That can just so be the knee-jerk reaction in a culture tells you how saturated it is with the wrong views.
And how evil.
Yeah, that's how evil the wrong view is.
Yeah. I mean, and also some of the motives behind it, I think, as well. You want to paint that as evil because you should all be sacrificing for other people. I think there's a real nihilistic kind of area. It's where giving up is the goal. The whole point is not they don't want your wealth, they want you to lose it. And there is that element. And there's also the element of just chaining the you're chaining the positive to the negative. So it's never that it's always that the people with the positive value have to sacrifice for the people without that value. So it's the people with the money, it's the people with the education, it's the people with the ambition, it's the people with the success. These are the ones that get penalized and have to support those who haven't achieved those things. So it's its own sort of, we have the brain drain. It's a kind of a value drain. It saps, I think, really the life and the rewards out of life. Sometimes for the sake of itself, and sometimes for the sake of others. But so we can go ahead and take questions.
So we have quite a few super chats, but most of them are not questions. So I'll read them out. I think we'll go through them pretty quickly, and then we can take audience questions.
Okay.
So Jonathan Honig says, thank you both for your tireless advocacy of reason, especially enjoying New Ideal podcast. Sammy is lost again, sans unicorn sticker. Shazbot asks, if two altruists are stranded on an island with limited food, how do they decide which one should sacrifice to the other?
Well, the question is, how do you consistently live a contradiction? And the answer is there's no answer. I mean, if the proper approach to any value is to give it up, neither of them can accept it, or they just play, ping pong with it. So you can't live a contradiction.
And if you take it outside of the kind of the the thought experiment of projecting desert island, 2 people land on it, and so on. The real answer is what the altruists look for is a person who's not an altruist, who produces things and will guilt them into giving the stuff over to them. That the whole essence of it is, look, we're at the top because look, we haven't produced anything, we don't know what to do and so on. You seem to be able to build a hut and fish, and so you owe us. And but the way the morality works is you're doing something wrong if you don't give it to us, if you don't give up, if you don't surrender. So what they do is they look for someone who produces.
See Atlas Shrugged. I mean, a lot of the book is about that.
The Shadowblade says, looking forward to the Ayn Rand Con Europe event tomorrow.
Great.
Atlas Spoke says, values are many where virtue is one, but nature is boundless, neither a one nor a many per se. The hospitality of mobility constitutes productivity.
I didn't understand that.
Ray asks, do you think Christianity validly highlighted to the ancient world the immense spiritual value of helping others while package dealing it with selfishness slash sacrifice? What about individualism?
I'll take the first part. No, I don't think Christianity highlighted the immense value of helping others. I don't think that's, no. I mean, because if the idea is that it's about sacrifice for others, it's not a value. It's the surrendering of a value, it's loss. So this is, just part of the question. Again, altruism pervades the culture. And it's this notion that if you help others, it's sacrificial. So they wipe out a notion of, yeah, I could actually care about other people for my own reasons, because I like people. They contribute to my life in some way. I like being around them, some of them. You know, the idea that having a concern for others or wanting to help other people. I'm a teacher, for Christ's sake. I spend my whole life teaching. Literally, since I was 16, I've been teaching. So my whole life is spent trying to get people to be better at what they're doing, more successful at what they're doing. I develop a strong relationship with my students and stuff, and this is a wholly beneficial thing, and 100% selfish on my part. Now, selfish in that regard doesn't mean calculating in the sort of narrow sense, well, if I teach this person and they learn something, maybe they'll come back and give me health care or something. Like, it's not, you know, I don't think rational people think about it like that, with these narrow sort of calculations or something. I mean, that could be a minor part of some element of some relationship with somebody, but that's not the way you think about it. So it really erodes, I think, the sense that, like you said, if you say, live your life for yourself, make the most of it, you must hate other people. It's the same thing. It's like, if you have a concern for others, it has to be an altruistic, self-sacrificial concern. And that's just not true. I think it's almost self-evidently not true. Yeah. Like if you ask somebody, that's another way in which it pervades the culture. Nobody even asked that question. It's such an obvious question. If they say, how could you possibly care about others if you advocate self-interest? It's like, I don't know, you ever had a friend? It's like, ever fallen in love? I don't know, had a girlfriend, a boyfriend, I don't know, someone who meant something to you? Are they important to you? Was it self-sacrificial? You know, it's just, people don't think when it comes to these things.
Well, they're taught not to think.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, so part of altruism is to tell people you have two choices, either exploit others or sacrifice for them. Like there's no third alternative, which is crazy. But it's again, a lot of people think that because altruism has dominated for centuries. But let me say something, there was something at the end about individualism. So there is this kind of view, and even Ayn Rand mentions it once or twice in her writings, that Christianity is important to the birth of individualism because it puts an emphasis on the individual soul, and that everyone has a soul which can, if you do the right things, ascend to heaven. I don't think that's true. I don't think it's true when you look at ancient Greece, that you would think of Christianity coming in the later Roman Empire as yeah, the ancient Greeks weren't individualistic, but these Christians are. I don't think you could walk into a nunnery and think, oh yeah, I've got a whole bunch of individuals here. As they recite the same prayers and do the same things and so on. So I think this is a long-standing argument, or like evidence supposedly for an argument that I think is false. And so part of the evidence, if you know things about ancient Greek culture, civilization, thought, the idea that there's not individualism here, I don't think there's full individualism here, but the idea that it's less individualistic than when you get Christianity on the scene, I think no one can seriously hold that in terms of thinking of historical cultural forces. And when you get the full birth of individualism in the 19th century, it's a product of the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment is self-consciously trying to reject religion and get out of the centuries of Christianity that they view, not all of them, but many of the Enlightenment thinkers view as hampered us or handcuffed us in certain ways. And what you get in the Enlightenment and why it leads to individualism is it takes seriously the idea that the essence of life is to produce things, it's to work, and it's to create. And when you get a full expression of that with capitalism coming out of the 17th, 18th century, you get the 19th century really is, in terms of thinking of its achievements, it's the century of individualism, and it's the least Christian century in Western history. So the idea that we have Christianity to thank for individualism, that's a widely held view that I think is false.
And one last little point on that one. And also there's an argument that because the Christians take this idea seriously that each one of your individual soul is sacred, and can't be crushed or destroyed, and so there are certain limits on what we can do as this is a movement toward rights or something. I hear this kind of thing. But what's the argument that every individual soul is somehow sacred? Is that you were created by God, owned by God, can be thrown away and destroyed by God. You're the product of God, and I can't go destroy this guy or this guy because why? Because you have some notion of an individual has to flourish. No, it's because that's God's property. And to think of yourself as God's property, it's, okay, well, I don't think we're moving in the direction of individualism. It's totally chaining you to something else.
Jeff says, Jonathan always thanks us for helping you keep the lights on. It's not why I value your shows, and I'm happy to contribute, which is the message you help spread. Bonnie sends a sticker. I think this is skyscrapers or something.
Is that better or worse than a unicorn?
It's less clear, but
okay.
Yeah, it is better. Atlas Spoke says, altruism, the external locus of control, systematically facilitates only a zero-sum cosmology, ideology, culture, or economy.
Well, I'm not sure what that's getting at, but if the idea that is altruism thinks it's a zero-sum world, I don't think that's true. Altruism, when we're thinking of it at a cultural level, and we're thinking of it as there's proponents of this approach to morality, not people who have absorbed it from their teachers and so on, but the actual advocates of it know that it's not a zero-sum game. They know that there's producers in the world who make things and grow, and their whole kind of way of being is we're going to be parasites on that. We're going to siphon that away. We're going to make the producers, and producer here means, it can mean businessman, it can mean an artist, anyone who makes something of value. Then it is now you're a target that you should give that up. You should surrender that. You should sacrifice it for the people who don't have it. And that's a recognition that the production actually happens. And then it's a whole morality designed to be to siphon the products of the producers to the non-producers. And this is part of what Atlas Shrugged is about. So that they know it's not a zero-sum world.
All right, Bradley asks a question that spans 2 super chats. So Will Smith's outburst was maybe result of expectations to be a strong protector. It's a struggle for men who have been socialized. Masculinity is about physical dominance in regards to other men. Is it that because without individual rights, this material realm hierarchy is the key to survival, and is this why Rand said a woman wants to look up to a man, because while not intellectually superior, he is physically?
I think in general there is in the culture some kind of an expectation for men to do react in certain ways. I think that's, okay, so let me speak for myself here and not for objectivism, because this is partly just personal. I don't pay much attention to that crap. I mean, the Will Smith and, all the, I don't know. It doesn't matter a lot to me, and I don't, maybe there's some big cultural takeaway here, but I mean, to me, this is just an inappropriate use of force by one actor. I think it's too philosophical to kind of it's too much of a philosophical overlay, I think, to say, well, there are all these expectations in the culture and these kinds of things, and somehow Will Smith is a victim of the expectations, and I don't know. To me, it sounds too much of that. I don't know what you...
I mean, I think the
reactions to it are more interesting, but...
The whole phenomenon shouldn't exist. So whether he snapped in regard to this, supposedly there's a backstory of animosity between Chris Rock and Will Smith. I can't actually care about it. So, but the wider phenomenon is, I think any self-respecting actor should not go to the Oscars. And not just for its political. The ceremonies have become that they try to find a comedian who's going to push to get the most insulting jokes he can about the very profession that they're here to celebrate. And there's something really wrong with it. There's a whole element to the Oscars now, and a lot of award shows are like this, where it's spitting in the face of the achievements. And if Will Smith actually thinks he's a good actor and has achieved things, he knows going to the ceremony, there's going to be jokes made at his expense, maybe at his wife's expense, and so on, and that this is now the essence of what that ceremony or award show is. And I would not go. I would not go to a ceremony like this if it was supposedly celebrating achievements and it was done in this way. So there's like if he snapped for a good reason, I don't know if he did, but I could imagine going to a ceremony like this and snapping for that kind of reason. But the real lesson is you shouldn't be there in the first place. Ayn Rand was asked this kind of question for different kinds of things. And she referenced Napoleon, that he would supposedly, I mean, the stories are he would be asked questions like, if you were in this military situation, what would you do? And it's a hopeless situation. There's no way out. And his answer was, I wouldn't be in that situation in the first place. I think he's too good a general to be in that. And that's my view of it. Like, I would not go to any of these things.
Because it has really become that.
Oh, yeah.
Directly insulting the profession. Yeah. Like, I mean, not everyone attends the Oscars, by the way. I mean, there are actors and there are directors who just don't go to the Oscars, whether it's for that reason or not.
And Jonathan Honig sends another super sticker with a hippopotamus throwing a knockout punch. All right, we can now take questions from the audience.
Oh,
you're doing it with the mic, as I assume that's what's happening.
I think, okay. Let's get Gilad next. He's in the back.
Test, okay. Going back to something you mentioned at the start of your talk, that the question that's begged by altruists is, why should others be the beneficiary of your actions? Have any altruistic philosophers tried to justify that specific question or explain why others should be the beneficiary of your actions and why that isn't a contradiction? It's okay to serve the happiness or the the benefit of others but not yourself?
I don't know. I'll say one thing is that I think there's a long-standing view that the self is the source of evil. And if you're motivated by that source, that your actions are morally tainted as a result. I mean, often it's self-interest is put it this way, this is more of a conventional perspective, and even by philosophers, but it's self-interest is the reason we need morality. I mean, that's the problem morality is meant to solve. People are self-interested. That screws everything up. So we need to bring in something called morality to curb self-interest, to restrain self-interest, to sort of act as a counter to self-interest. So it's common to think of self-interest as the source or the root of evil, in effect. It's the people going after stuff for themselves, those people. And it's, in part because people need to learn and to be taught and to learn what really should I pursue? How should I conduct myself? If you told everyone, okay, forget altruism, everybody, we're all done here, go pursue your self-interest, live for yourself, be selfish. They're not necessarily going to know what to live. It could be like, okay, well, I'm just going to screw over other people and get them before they get me. Who knows what they're going to think? So there is a history of thinking about the self and self-interest as the source of evil and the reason why we need a morality, which is often why they think of morality in terms of it's the anti-self-interest. So that's one element of it. I don't know where this, but I'm sure it's not the only. But
Yeah, so there's been arguments. So one of the points Ayn Rand makes is there's been no attempt to justify altruism other than on supernatural, mystical ways. So there are other arguments that are given. The question is whether you can seriously hold that argument and think. But so one is just to, that's what we're saying, that if you've produced the value, you don't have a right to it. If you view yourself as unworthy of it and undeserving, and I didn't earn this, then you have a right to it. But can someone really think, I don't deserve this, I didn't do anything to achieve this, so therefore I can keep it, it's mine. I can give that argument because you take that argument seriously. So, or is that required that it's, religion has a vested interest in people, everyone thinking you're sinners. So you can keep this, you've been given this, but don't think you deserved it. Don't think you earned it. You're still a sinner. That's why you're getting it. That's a way of breaking people and keeping them down, in effect. That's an argument. Is it a good argument? Or could you give that in a non-religious way and think, seriously, that's a good argument? And I think the answer is no.
Hello?
all right, the microphone just to get passed around. Go ahead. Razi, you're in control.
Can you hear me? Okay, cool. Could you speak to examples where people wrongly call something sacrifice? For example, a student studying instead of going out to party, or a teacher who goes out of his way to make sure his students succeed. Mm-hmm. Why, in your view, why is that not sacrifice? And why do people feel motivated to call that sacrifice?
Well, in some sense, we can say what Ayn Rand thinks of a sacrifice, but in the the common denominator there is that you're giving up something. So I'm giving up what I could have done with my evening to spend more time with a promising student, time that wasn't in effect owed. It's not office hours, but you go much longer because and so there is a sense in which you're giving up something. I could have done something else with my evening. But the reason why we don't call that a sacrifice is because if the teacher, for example, thinks that this is actually more important to me than the evening I'm giving up, it's more important that I spend time nurturing the student, asking questions, helping them develop. If that's more important to you, you gave up an evening, but for something more important. If I give up 5 pounds and I get 100 pounds for it, nobody would think of that as a sacrifice. Well, you gave up the 5 pounds. It's but that's more like an investment. I give up something of lower value so I can get something of higher value. Same with the studying thing. I could have seen that concert tonight, but it's much more important to me to study for the exam, because if I don't get the degree, I'm going to have to do the year over again, and like, what's the concert going to mean at that point? It's like I threw something away. So she thinks of a sacrifice as the surrender of a greater value for the sake of a lesser value or a non-value, something that's not even important to you. So, but I think in general parlance, often people say, honey, I sacrificed years for you. And sometimes that's true. And they really did throw away things that were more important to them for the sake of their kids. And it was a big sacrifice, and they resent you for it. But often people just use that to mean, I gave up a lot, for this, but hopefully they did it for the sake because they think you're more important as a child to their own life. But I think it's important to keep that in mind. Otherwise, you just sort of blend an investment into something more important to you with throwing your values away.
So there's a deliberate element to it that so you put it for the husband and wife, and in this case it was the example of a husband doing something, and calling it a sacrifice, and not knowing, like, am I doing this because I value the relationship, and a relationship is a trade, and it can't be like every Friday evening we do what I want to do, and if we're doing something my wife wants to do on the Friday evening, it's a sacrifice. And so am I surrendering something that I shouldn't be? Am I giving up a value, or is this part of the cost of achieving a value? And in the widest sense, a sacrifice in that sense, I sacrificed my evenings for 2 years to earn an MBA. All that means is it's a cost. That's what I paid because I wanted to get an MBA. So the term sacrifice in these kinds of contexts is sometimes used to make it difficult for the person to identify. Is this a sacrifice in the sense of I'm surrendering some value that I should not be? I'm not getting something in return. But everybody knows that what morality is asking for, when it asks for sacrifice, is to sacrifice my values and get nothing in return. And so there can be an individual who's confused about this. There's no confusion at the cultural level that what the call for sacrifice means is self-sacrifice. Mm-hmm. And they don't look at a Bill Gates and say, like, look how much he sacrificed. Look at how much time he put into building Microsoft. He could have been spending time with his kids. He could have been learning how to play the guitar. And so he sacrificed all of that to build Microsoft. And nobody thinks, oh yeah, so that makes it a moral achievement because he sacrificed so much. The whole essence, and everybody knows this, is, no, he's sacrificing when he gives his billions away. Because what's he getting in return? No. So there's not a confusion at a cultural level about what sacrifice means. Everybody knows that when we get to morality and it demands sacrifice, it's demanding the sacrifice of yourself, of your self-interest, of your values for the sake of something else.
But that's regularly masked, I think, in the culture when they put a positive spin on it. But you'll be helping other people. Yeah. And they try to present to you as a decent person some positive value that's actually being achieved. Oh, these people actually got housing or whatever it was that, and see it. So it's not evil. Was that evil? They got housing, and so they present a kind of a positive value, which it kind of muddies it because it kind of seems like some good was done out of it. But I think the end is just really to give it up. They probably don't care what the value is that comes out of it. Next.
Yeah, back. It doesn't seem like it?
It doesn't seem like it, but I can hear you. I don't know if any...
Anyway, I was about to ask the question that Tom asked, so I'm selfishly yielding my time to my friend Ben over here.
Okay. Hi, Ben.
Hello? Yeah.
There you go. Yeah, it works.
I was just trying to think of whether there are situations where you feel you've made a voluntary sacrifice. And I was trying to think of examples, say, where a parent, and say, the parent moral dilemma there. Judgment about what you expect.
I think, so you asked a question, I don't know if everybody heard, but it's a question about when it's maybe right to make a sacrifice, when its sacrifice is proper, and the example was given, a parent has a child who needs a kidney, for example, and you have the opportunity to give a transplant to your child. I mean, again, whether that's a sacrifice depends on, I think, the parent's values. So I think of sacrifice as, you tell me what you think about this, because this is how I think about this, is I think technically a sacrifice is a hierarchy value violation, and respect with your, so you have a higher value, which you give up for the sake of a lower value. Now you might think the person's values are screwed up. Like they should be valuing this higher, but they don't. They value something else trivial. You think is trivial, it's higher and stuff. I think that's still, they should think of that as a sacrifice, because in their own mind, they're giving up something that's more important for the sake of what's less important. So anyway, that's part of it. I think that's how to think about what a sacrifice is. There's a wider question of like, what should you value? And so I'd have a better view about what you should be honoring and versus sacrificing. The case of the parent is, I think, well, it depends on the parent, but the short answer is if the parent thinks that the life of the child is really important to them and it's more important than one kidney that they can offer, and that it's a desperate situation too, because it's sort of like, this is not normally the decisions we have to make, so it's a kind of an edge case, but it does occur. I don't think it would be a sacrifice if the parent did that. It depends on, what if the kid is also super sick and only looks like they only have reason to think the kid's gonna live for a year? And you have real reason to think the kid's only gonna live for a year, he's gonna die. I think it would be up to the parents, like, no, I'm not gonna, because then I should be like, maybe I would seriously cripple myself if they thought, but again, it just depends on all sorts of things. One, how much the parent loves the child. I would not say it's an inherent obligation. If you're a parent and your kid needs this, I wouldn't say that. It depends on other factors. Is the kid sick with all sorts of other things that they might only last 6 months? Maybe that's worth it to the parent. Maybe to have the kid for another 6 months, it's worth a kidney. And so another person, maybe it's not. And so it's a kind of, that's a tough call for people, but they have to think about what's important to them, where their values really are, and what's worth it, what's worth the cost, as you put it.
And if you take parenting more broadly, it's a major decision to have kids, and the perspective, a self-interested perspective, requires that you think carefully about that decision and what it will mean for your life, and for the values that children are bringing to you. And if you talk to any halfway decent parent, I think the values are enormous. So they're willing to do many, many things that they would not do for just some stranger. And I think it's rational for them to do. When we're talking in the context of altruism, the other kinds of cases you should be thinking about, and certainly the preachers and advocates of altruism think about this, is should you give your kidney to a stranger? And they will say yes. I mean, they're one of the leading 20th century, Peter Singer, 20th century advocates of altruism. He gives these examples, and he has followers who do this. That it is, if I'm not concerned with my values, my interests, my life, I really should give up my kidneys for the sake of other people, and it's strangers, and it doesn't matter who they are, and I don't even have to know if they're good people or not good people. And so this is what is required of me if I take morality seriously. So you don't need to go to those kinds of cases if you're trying to understand altruism, because they'll give you a much more straightforward case where I think from the perspective of self-interest, it's clearly the answer is no, you should not do this. And what altruism says is, well, but to hell with your self-interest.
Yeah, and it's to try to eliminate any personal value connection at all to the act. So someone trying to be really consistent with this, and I've read about this is real. A guy, he goes on the internet, to find someone anonymously, he has no idea who they are, why they need a kidney, it's irrelevant, right? And makes it impossible for the person to find out who donated it. So he can't even get a thank you card or anything. It's to completely eliminate that and to present that as that's the moral ideal. And that's to see it starkly. This is what it amounts to. Yes, Amy.
Okay, so we know that sacrifices, you made a great case against it, against altruism. Oh, thank you, Razi. So you made a great case against altruism and sacrifice. Now, what the gentleman who was just talking was alluding to is the idea of a potential, as you might put it, Aaron, a value hierarchy adjustment. The idea that, now my child needs a kidney. It's worth it to me now to give my kidney up because I love my child more. My value hierarchy is changing and I need to adjust it. So I'm going to go ahead with the surgery. So those sorts of scenarios, people don't have a one-word concept for that other than, adjusting your values. I mean, is that, I really think it would be nice to have more of a succinct concept for that. Or do you know of any? Thank you.
What do you mean by an adjustment? So the way I put it was a hierarchy violation in the sense where you're taking something that's more important and giving it up for something less important. That's the way I think about a sacrifice. When you think about is the adjustment the sense in, I wasn't in this situation last week, but now I'm faced with, I might need to lose a kidney. I hadn't planned for that. And now, okay, is that what you meant?
Yes.
And this is sort of a new introduction of a new problem, a new context that makes you rethink what's important to you?
So the only thing that most people can turn to is the concept of sacrifice, where that really isn't necessarily a sacrifice. It may be completely not a sacrifice. It may be a new value to them to give their kidney up for their child. It would just be...
I don't exactly think of it with value, but go ahead.
I don't understand why you think it would be what you would appeal to is sacrifice. So there is a reason that is happening, but it is, the scenario is presented as now my interests conflict with the child's interest, that if I'm going to take that seriously, then it jeopardizes my life. And so that's the scenario being presented. So I can understand why it would be thought of as sacrifice. But you want a one-word concept, it's valuing. All valuing, if you, in a genuine sense of what it means to value, is to think about any specific goal in the context of your whole life, which means thinking of it in relationship to your other goals. And the idea that your life is a static thing that changes, you have one big life event every 4 years, you have a kid, you get married, whatever, you retire, and that's not what life is like at all. Like, it's not even close to like that. Life is an ongoing process of thinking about what are all the values that I need to achieve, how do they mesh or integrate together. And so this is part of when Ayn Rand says that what altruism does is it destroys the concept of morality in a person's life. This is what morality is about. The principles of morality are to teach you how to value. So it's to how to make good on the act of valuing. And that it's a complex achievement. So she views to achieve your self-interest is to achieve a constellation of values that together make up your life. And to figure out that these are all values, I can integrate these together into a life, and a life that I want to live and that I want to lead. That's what morality is about, and that's why you need the virtues. That's why you need the cardinal values in objective. There's a whole slew of things on her approach. This is what you need, and this is what it means to value. And altruism says, no, you don't need any of this, because the essence of morality is any time you have a whiff that something is a value to you, you're to give it up. So the whole activity of morality, according to altruism, is besides the point. This is why one of the reasons Ayn Rand talks about altruism so much, and it comes up in almost every essay of hers, is it destroys the whole process of achieving life. And for her, what philosophy is is, she put she called it, formally her philosophy is called objectivism. That's the name she gave it. Informally, it's a philosophy for living on earth. The whole focus is how to achieve values. And altruism takes that, it's all besides the point. At best, like that's the best thing you can say about altruism.
Hello. Most of the things that people, most of the things that people have brought up have already been answered now. But I was interested in when I more want to make a comment now because it was exciting when you talked about Jesus on the cross, and it's been on my mind an awful lot that, well, first of all, I think you said that I think Christianity was a death cult when it first started out. I'm not, these are mutterings I've heard. But the symbol of Jesus, Jesus the Jew, hanging on a cross, wherever you go, is an iconic symbol of he died for our sins. And it's almost like, and now I'm exonerated. Okay, there's that sacrificial Jew that in the consciousness of man for 2,000 years, and forever the Jew is to be, in my mind, sacrificed, and there's a symbol of it hanging off every church. And those are the things that I wonder when we had that time where there was a pull down of the statues of people who'd been slave owners, and they'd gone round like in Bath, was it Bristol, and they de-iconized some of these figures who were icons who'd probably done good things, but done them in a modern context in a bad way. And I wonder how useful the iconic cross is, and in fact, in many ways, is a very dangerous symbol in our modern life. It's just something that I've observed. And finally, to say, we drink the blood of Christ and we eat his flesh. It's very, very much Romanistic, because they used to sort of pre-kill their slaves and sell bits of flesh in the markets of Jerusalem and stuff like that.
I think there's something about, I'll say something about the symbolism. It's like, some people, if they find out some benefactor of a university or something, he or his parents had slaves, and so some of his money came, they're tearing down statues and things like that. It's like, what's our attitude toward, all the crosses and things, and the symbols of sacrifice and the symbols of surrendering life and that sort of thing. I mean, I would never advocate that they're pulled down. Well, it depends on the context, I think. But the idea that it's so normal, and people wear it around their neck, you see it in all sorts of places, and but like you said, it's presented to us as, we keep this as a remembrance because Jesus sacrificed for your sins to cleanse you temporarily of your sins. And so we should therefore emulate Christ by turning the other cheek, by forgiving our enemies, by loving those that hate and despite us, that sort of thing. And we should emulate Jesus and be sacrificers. So who cares if he's absolved you of your sins, allegedly? It's like, but your whole life is now supposed to be spent in penance and subservience and obedience. Thanks. But the idea that that's just a normal symbol that you'd see in a dentist's office, I had one in my bedroom as a kid. I don't know, it's just sort of normal. But he looks a lot more friendly when you, the little pictures. but as a symbol, no, so that's the other thing is, what you would never see in my house, at least, was some gruesome depiction of Christ where he looks like he's in agony and there's blood dripping everywhere. I think that's much more celebrated with other people. I don't know, my family was always, the little lamb and things. So.
I'll just say something on the issue of symbols and celebrations. You have to ask what is being celebrated and why. So in these tearing down statues, there is an issue. So take three different cases that I think you should think these are differences that matter. You have statues of Robert E. Lee, and I live in Virginia in the U.S., and we have statues up. They're starting to come down of Robert E. Lee. We've got highways and roads named for. These are Confederate generals who fought for slavery and who are being celebrated because they fought for slavery. The idea that there's something really bad about this symbol is not a crazy idea. What's crazy is these things are still up. Thomas Jefferson owned slaves. The Jefferson Memorial in Washington, is it up because he owned slaves? Is the idea that we're celebrating the fact that he owned slaves? And I think the answer to that is no. What you're celebrating is his actual achievements that he regarded as his crucial achievements, and that I think rightly posterity regards as his crucial achievements, including the Declaration of Independence and so on. But, and this is the third kind of thing, that you can simultaneously celebrate things that are worthy of celebration and whitewash the things that the person did bad. And you have to ask for, when you're celebrating, is it being partly done to whitewash, even if the achievement is in a certain context deserving of celebration, is the way the celebration is being carried out to whitewash the other bad things about the person? And that is a real issue. And for instance, I've gone to Monticello twice, and it's a span of probably 20 years. And I think the handling of Thomas Jefferson owning slaves, the way it's talked about and depicted in Monticello now, is better than it was 20 years ago. 20 years ago, there's an element that it's being whitewashed. And that's true of Mount Vernon, which is the kind of monument to Washington and so on. So it's not irrelevant to know these facts about these people and to keep that in mind in thinking about them and what they did and their achievements, how to think about the achievements. So those are three different kinds of cases that I think one should think differently about.
And taking seriously the kinds of things, like I've been to Monticello as well, and you go visit like the slave quarters and stuff, and you're like, Jesus Christ, like it's not, this is what it means to own people and how they lived. And it's like, that doesn't mean you can't admire him for the other achievements, which are real. And look up the inscription that's on the inside of the Jefferson Memorial. It's a wonderful statement. I think it's one of the reasons why it's there. But that doesn't mean you have to tear down that or tear down his own achievements. But you should have a reality check as to what this really meant. Yeah.
So we have two last super chats. Atlas Spoke says, nature values virtue. It has no choice. You do. And Shazbot asks, is altruism related to the number of prison inmates in the U.S. who have been wrongfully convicted?
Is altruism related to the number of prison people convicted and they're in prison, they're wrongly convicted?
Yes.
I don't know what's being asked.
Yeah, I don't know what he's thinking about.
Does altruism have something to do with wrong convictions? I don't know. Doesn't jump out at me. Nothing jumps out at me. And to end on that brilliant note.
So we have, I know many people have questions. We can only take two quick ones from Catherine and Michael, but that's why you should all attend Ayn Rand Con over the weekend. You'll have much more time to ask questions.
Would you thank you very much for a fascinating evening. Would you please say more about why it's okay to accept other people's sacrifices?
The first thought that jumps into my mind without thinking is I don't want to accept other people's sacrifices. If I find out that why altruists consider okay. Catherine Dickens, no. Why altruists think it's okay to accept sacrifices? I I think that has to do, again, with the sort of, in part for any given individual, it just might be an unthinking, like, I never thought about that, I never tried to square that circle. But for other reasons, I think it's because what's really known is it's the transfer of a value from those who produced it or created it to someone who didn't. And in the end, it's really about that kind of a parasitical transfer, and it's not like why did the poor people get to accept our sacrifices? Why the hell that doesn't make sense? No, they don't say that. It's why do you get to keep anything if you have things? So I think it's more that it's known that what justifies the people who can take it is that, I mean, that's the whole point. Is to get other people either to take it from them by force or to guilt them into giving it, or to teach them it's wrong to keep it. And it's about loss on the part of people who have values. And I think the benefit to others is a smokescreen. I mean, I think in general. I mean, you could have some well-meaning person who thinks, you know what, but it's not, that's not the cultural phenomenon, I don't think.
So you partially answered my question already, but I'm still a bit unsure about it, so I'm asking for like maybe more details on it. So what I'm really struggling with is that in the past, other things, like for example religion, were synonymous with philosophy. And people have managed to break out of it, managed to reject religion and live philosophy, even if it's wrong philosophy. And today you have many smart people that think for themselves, very independent, they reject religion and other things, but they are clinging to altruism. They make movements like effective altruism. They search it in biology and spend their whole lives searching for natural explanations of altruism. So why is altruism so specifically able to infiltrate people's minds and make them really make part of their identity?
You want to take it?
Yeah,
Well, okay, go ahead.
So one of the reasons is that it's the hardest thing to question. I think the rarest phenomenon is a moral innovator. So someone who has new things to say about morality and fundamentally new things is rarer than people who have fundamentally new things to say about physics. You can find there's more Newtons and Einsteins than there are in morality. And so why is that? I think one of the reasons is that to say at a fundamental level that morality is wrong, that is what we think about morality is wrong, is you're saying that what we say is good is evil, and what we say is evil is good. That's evil. So the kind of the simultaneous, what requires of intellectual certainty that you're right and the conventional view is wrong, and the moral courage to do that, to hold fast to that, is the rarest thing. So you find many, take a Richard Dawkins, who I think in many ways is courageous. The way that he talks about religion, addresses some of its mysticism, supernaturalism, and the destruction it creates in people's lives, I view as courageous. But when he gets to morality, it's completely conventional. And I think that you need simultaneously more intellectual power and more courage than he has. And it's a very rare phenomenon for this. So Ayn Rand that she challenges morality that is what everybody thinks about morality at its root, is such a rare phenomenon that it's so you're sort of looking at it as like, this is wrong, why don't people see it? But I look at it the other direction. It's like, why can so few people see this? And it really takes a lot. It's hard to underestimate the thinking that she did. And you can see some of it in her journals, and the courage from very early on to ask questions about morality, to not be satisfied with the answers that she's given, and to think there's something really irrational going on here. And to have the courage to persevere in that when everyone's telling you, but like everything you think and do is evil. And she was told, that she's selfish, self-centered, all the standard thing will be, but directed, you could think like 100-fold at her, because she's not just having some thoughts, she's voicing them, she's formulating a different view, and so on. And to withstand all that pressure is very difficult. So, and this is part of the way cultural change works. It will be a slow process that she's convinced some people, but that she convinces people, and there will become a time, what they call a tipping point, that it will be much easier for people to say, yeah, there's something wrong with altruism. We're nowhere close to that tipping point. So it's very hard for somebody to say, yeah, like everything people think about what's good is actually evil, and what they think is evil is actually good. And so that it's very hard to maintain that perspective.
You said 2 points. One about the tipping point, where it's just not okay to say these kind of things. Think about how easy it is to come out if you're gay. It's pretty much many people find this significantly easier today than you would in like 1950 or something like that. I mean, it's really, there's been a big change in that respect, and I don't think there's been that change with regard to religion. To say that you're an atheist, I mean, that was usually, you were executed or whatever, or you're just a pariah or whatever. That's much more normal these days, and this has not yet been normalized to think that altruism is evil and so on. And the way you put it also was, there's so many people who reject religion, and they move to philosophy. So if they reject religion and move to philosophy, how come they can have to hang on to altruism? Because altruism is all over philosophy. So you're looking for the dominant views about ethics. It's a Kantian version of ethics. I mean, in academia, this is the dominant versions. You'll get Kantianism, which is about duty, and you'll get utilitarianism, which is essentially altruism. It's you have to work for not your own happiness, but the greatest happiness for the greatest number. And if that means subordinating yourself, then so be it. So you got altruism on the left, and altruism on the right, and altruism from religion, and it's just altruism from the environmentalists, and so it's not an option. So you say abandoning religion doesn't give you objectivism. Abandoning religion gets you one variant of a mystical approach to life.